Okay, let's dive right in. May 7th, 2025, that's the date, circled on the calendar now for Real ID enforcement.
Yeah, finally seems like it's happening after, what, years of delays.
Exactly. So, after all that kicking the can down the road to board a domestic flight or get into certain federal buildings, you'll need that Real ID compliant license. Or, well, another approved ID.
It's been buzzing around for so long.
It really has. So for this deep dive, we're trying to get a handle on a specific question, especially if you're looking at it from a conservative Republican viewpoint. Is Real ID actually legal, or is it government stepping too far?
That's the core of it. And we've gathered some, well, pretty interesting sources that touch on the legality, the Constitution, the whole purpose behind it.
Right. Because as we found, it's not like there's just one single conservative opinion on this. It's got layers.
Definitely nuances there.
So we've got a Fox News piece, which kind of lays out some of the, let's say, strong conservative arguments for it. Then we looked through a Reddit discussion. Always interesting to see the public chatter and the real world questions people have.
Yeah, get the ground level view.
And for the factual stuff, the nuts and bolts, we have a big report from the Government Accountability Office, the GAO. They really detail how it all works.
Right, the mechanics of it.
Plus, just for broader context, we pulled in bits from places like the Cato Institute, ACLU, Columbia Undergraduate Law Review, CBS News, Voting Rights Lab, a real mix.
So the mission today is really to unpack those conservative Republican arguments, legal and practical, for and maybe against Real ID.
Exactly. Get those clear takeaways. Try not to get too bogged down in government speak.
Sounds good. So thinking about where Real ID even came from, looking at it through that conservative lens, you absolutely have to start with 9/11.
No question. The Real ID Act, passed back in 2005, was a direct response. Congress acted because of the attacks.
And the GAO report really hammers this home. Well, the really disturbing fact was that some of the 9/11 hijackers actually had state driver's licenses, fraudulent ones.
Yeah. So Real ID was basically conceived as, okay, we need baseline national standards for how states verify identity when they issue these licenses.
The thinking being, and Fox News points this out, if you raise the security bar for those IDs, make them harder to fake.
Then it's much harder to get credible-looking fakes.
Right. And that's, a really central pillar of the conservative argument for why Real ID is legitimate, why it's needed. Make it tougher to get fake IDs. You stop criminals and critically potential terrorists from exploiting the system, especially air travel.
That direct line back to the security failures of 9/11, that carries a lot of weight in this perspective.
Absolutely.
And the Fox News piece also really highlights another angle, one that got, well, a lot of attention during the Trump administration, using Real ID to help control illegal immigration.
Right. The argument there is if you need proof of lawful status to get a Real ID compliant license.
Then people here unlawfully generally can't get one. And so they can't use that specific type of ID to board domestic flights.
Yeah, there was that DHS memo Fox News mentioned, pretty explicit about it, saying Real ID closes loopholes, things that supposedly allowed people not legally present to fly using other non-compliant IDs.
So from that conservative angle, the one prioritizing immigration enforcement, Real ID looks like a necessary tool, upholding immigration law right at the state DMV level.
Which, connects to some of those Reddit threads we saw. People pointing out how before Real ID, the rules for getting a license really varied state by state.
Right. Some were much stricter than others. And the concern, you heard it there, was that maybe those looser states could be, well, exploited. Easier to get some kind of ID if you were undocumented.
Someone even mentioned how easy it used to be to fake the old paper licenses. Remember those?
Oh, yeah. So the core conservative idea often ties together national security against terrorism and ensuring the integrity of ID documents against misuse, including by those not legally in the U.S.
It bundles those concerns.
Now, we should be clear, it's not like every conservative agrees 100%. The Fox article mentions folks like Representative Massey.
Right, who see it more as like a Patriot Act era overreach, kind of Big Brother-ish.
Exactly. Something that maybe sat on the books but wasn't really pushed until the Trump administration decided to enforce it.
And that really points to that classic tension within conservative thought, doesn't it?
Yeah.
National security versus limited government, individual liberty.
But it does seem the prevailing view among conservative Republicans tends to land in favor of Real ID, especially when framed around post-9/11 security and immigration control.
Okay, so let's drill down into the legality question from that viewpoint.
Hmm.
Where does the justification come from?
It seems to mostly hang on national security, right? The idea that the federal government has to ensure security, especially for things like interstate travel, flying, accessing federal buildings.
So even though some groups, like the ACLU or the Columbia Law Review article, raise concerns about the 10th Amendment.
Which, just quickly, is the part of the Constitution saying powers not given to the federal government belong to the states or the people. The concern being the feds are telling states how to run their DMVs.
Right. They talk about commandeering state agencies. But the conservative argument generally pushes back on that.
How so?
Well, the dominant view would likely argue that securing travel between states, controlling who gets into federal sites that's squarely within federal power, think Commerce Clause, or just the inherent power to protect national security.
So states cooperating isn't federal overreach,
Yeah.
it's necessary collaboration.
Pretty much. Necessary to meet this critical national security goal.
Yeah.
That's the likely framing.
Okay. And then, practically speaking, the focus shifts to the security upgrades themselves.
Yeah, the tangible stuff. The GAO report is great on this. It lays out the minimum standards verifying name, birth date, social security number, address, lawful status.
And the Reddit comments reflected this too, people talking about needing, 2 proofs of address now, getting your social security number verified. It's definitely more hoops.
And the electronic systems are key. Things like SSOLV that checks your social security number directly with the Social Security Administration.
Ah, so it's not just showing the card, they actually check the number electronically.
Exactly. Big step against fake numbers.
Yeah.
And SVE, the system for verifying immigration documents. The GAO details these. Conservatives would point to this as concrete proof it works, makes IDs more trustworthy.
Plus the security features on the cards themselves, holograms, things to prevent counterfeiting.
Right. All part of the package. And the GAO did say states reported catching more fake documents because of these tougher checks.
Okay, but what about the pushback? Even conservatives sometimes complain about the hassle, the cost, maybe, of getting one. That came up on Reddit.
Sure, yeah, the inconvenience factor is real.
Mm-hmm.
But the counter-argument within that conservative frame is likely, look, it's a necessary trade-off.
Security costs something, basically, whether it's time or money.
Right. It's the price for better security, for ID integrity, and they probably also push back hard on calling it a national ID card. By stressing its state licenses, meeting federal standards for specific federal uses, not one single federal database card for everything. That distinction is important to them.
Got it. And what about the states themselves? They don't have to comply, technically, right?
Technically, no. It's not a direct mandate like you must do this, but the consequences are pretty significant if they don't.
Because their residents wouldn't be able to fly using their standard license or get into those federal buildings.
Exactly, so there's a huge incentive. From a conservative view, that's not really federal coercion. It's more the logical result. If a state chooses not to meet the agreed-upon security level for these national purposes, it's on the state.
Interesting. And one quick distinction, that voter ID versus real ID. The Voting Rights Lab pointed this out.
Yeah, they serve different functions. Real ID is about verifying lawful presence. Are you legally allowed to be here, essentially?
Whereas voter ID is mainly about confirming you are who you say you are and eligible to vote in that place.
Right. From a conservative perspective, both are often seen as important for security in their own ways. Real ID for identification security, voter ID for election security, but they tackle different problems.
Okay, so if we try to sort of wrap this up, synthesize it, the main conservative Republican view seems to be that real ID is legal and it's necessary.
Yeah, necessary for national security, especially fighting terrorism, and also for helping enforce immigration laws. Setting federal minimums for state IDs used federally is seen as, well, common sense.
Improve security for planes, federal sites, makes sense from that perspective.
And while, yes, you do hear those concerns within the conservative world about government reach, about states' rights.
The big brother argument.
Right.
Right.
But the dominant position seems to support the basic goal, secure ID standards.
So that leaves us, and you listening, with something to think about as this May 2025 deadline gets closer.
What are the bigger implications here? This move towards more standardized ID, how do we keep balancing national security needs with, individual liberties?
And how might that balance shift in the future? It makes you think about all the different levels of ID we need now, right? For buying stuff, for travel, for accessing services.
Yeah, what's the thinking behind those different levels?
Yeah.
Why is one thing okay for this, but you need something more secure for that? Lots to chew on there. It's definitely complex.